What makes the town of Hingham unique isn't only its commitment to preserving its historic properties, but its historic practices as well. The open nature of town meeting has existed since the early days of Hingham. Town moderator Michael J. Puzo knows a few things about this unique yearly forum. Let's just say he's the guy that runs the show. Hello, I'm Joe Collymore, and welcome to Close-Ups. My guest today is Mr. Michael J. Puzo, town moderator here in the town of Hingham. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Joe. Happy to be here.
I'm glad that you were able to be here. Have you fully recovered as yet from town meeting that took place?
Absolutely.
Michael, you have been working in this community for many, many years, but could you share with our listeners a little bit about your background?
Sure, Joe. I grew up in North New Jersey, right outside New York City, suburb called Teaneck, New Jersey, 42,000 people, quite a bit bigger than Hingham, very different form of government. Came up here to go to Boston College in 1970, stayed through, went to law school at Boston College, began working. I haven't made much progress. I'm still at the same job I started 40 years ago. Boston law firm called Hemingway and Barnes. Christine and I moved here to Hingham in 1981, raised 4 children here. First job that I can remember having was I got a call from actually my predecessor, Tom O'Donnell, asking me if I would consider town service. And I served first on something called the Hingham Transportation Committee. And I did that for a bit, and other town service that I can recall. I was on the Zoning Board of Appeals for years, focused on land use issues and the like. I served on the Town Administrator Search Committee when we were looking for a new town administrator some years ago. For 12 years, I served on the Hingham Personnel Board. And then at one point when Tom O'Donnell, after 45 years of illustrious service as Hingham's town moderator from age 40 until age 85, decided perhaps it was time. And I stood for re-election in his stead.
The role of town moderator, for those who perhaps may have never attended a town meeting, new residents in the community, at times it can be a bit daunting, confusing. It's been referred to as the one and only opportunity where the average American citizen can truly get in and their hands on local government.
Sure.
Tell me more about town meeting and the unique aspects of what that means.
Oh, happily. Town meeting, as you point out in your question, town meeting is kind of unique to New England because it's New England, right? And so a lot of what we have here finds its roots in the fact that the English settlers came here and they established a town, so pick Hingham. Hingham is established in 1635. A group of people come to this part of the world. They name their town after their town in England. It's fortunately not New Hingham, it's Hingham. But it's Hingham, England, transported to New England. And their form of governance was to have a meeting. I mean, the same way you might have a meeting at your business of the directors, or a meeting at my law firm of the partners. The meeting was a meeting of those people who constituted the town meeting. And the meeting house, so Old Ship Church, which sits up on that hill and in the square, is the meeting house. And of course, without getting too deeply into the Constitution and the like, there was not a division between church and state back then. So you would go to the meeting house and you would have a worship service. You might also have at a given gathering time a decision needed to be made, perhaps about the allocation of land or grazing rights and raising money for common purposes. And of course, this all predates the founding of the United States. And the form of government was to have the voters, who of course at that point would have all been male, gather and have a meeting. and someone would preside and would, for that given meeting, be the moderator, because there had to be some order to the meeting. So the meeting as a governance structure is a critical component of what makes Hingham a special kind of place. I think often people who live here or maybe selling property here or deciding where they want to settle down know by virtue of the fact that Hingham is physically a lovely looking place, and it's on the water, and it has a mix of housing. It has affordable housing, expensive housing, it has a fine school system, but I dare say that one of the critical components of what makes Hingham the kind of community it is can be traced back to the fact that we still have, after all these years, open town meeting. If you think about our form of government, as I said, I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey. Teaneck, New Jersey had a town council, an elected mayor. It was the mayor's job. He or she was paid to be mayor. Contrast that with our system here in Hingham, where you have open town meeting. You know, we had town meeting Monday night. We had approximately 600 registered voters check in at the high school, a fairly orderly process. There's a sense of ritual to it, which I think is very important. There's a sense of focus. There's also a community aspect. You know, we saw a young J.T. German introduced by Congressman Lynch as having been appointed to Annapolis, and the town took great pride in that. You know, a son of Hingham going to Annapolis. His father's a chief petty officer in the United States Navy and the Veterans Service officer. It was a beautiful moment. And it was shared by a community. And the reason the community was assembled was because they were constituting at that moment town meeting. Often people will say, oh, I don't go to town meeting. And my kind of wiseacre answer is, actually, you don't go to town meeting. You are town meeting. Now, contrast that, for good or ill, think about our state government or our national government. By necessity, those governments are representative. We vote for a member of Congress. We vote for a member of the United States Senate or our local Senate or our rep for the great and general court in the Commonwealth. And there's a governor, and the governor has great power. And the legislature makes the laws, and they make the budget, and they raise taxes, or they legalize marijuana on a ballot initiative, you know, and then they will regulate it on a state level. Selectmen are the executive officers of the town. They're going to execute day to day the laws of the town, apply the state laws as they might have an impact on Hingham. But the legislative body is the meeting. So this warrant book, for people who are new to town, this form of government was fascinating to them. The fact that you all assemble and do this? So yes. And you'll get a warrant book. And you know, if you remember your high school Latin or your Providence College Latin, it's a warning. It's a warrant. So, like, for example, when there's a warrant for my arrest, this is a warrant. It is warning the people of Hingham. In one sense, it's kind of charming. It goes back to 1635 when you were warned. And there was a warrant. And you were called to be present. Now, one thing that has changed in the many years since Hingham was founded is you don't get arrested for failing to go to the meeting.
I heard they used to do that. Yeah, that's right.
You used to. Yes. Why are you being warned? Well, number one, you're being told this is important stuff. And you are being told what the details are, when the meeting will take place, what will be discussed, and what will be decided. And you are warned. So it's a great tradition. And I think it also percolates down to the many people who give volunteer service to the town. As I said before we began, I brought two props. One was the warrant booklet. And it's very well done. And I can say that proudly because I have nothing to do with it. I put a little rules of the road piece in the front on town meeting procedure. But this entire book is put together by volunteers and obviously to some extent some of the town employees. But it lays out everything that the meeting will be deciding. It's sent out to every home and available electronically on the website. So those folks who choose to give it the time can prepare without, needing to spend 2 weeks doing it. There's a question. That's an article. Will the town do X? Will the town do Y? Then there's a comment. And the comment gives you kind of what you need to know to make a thoughtful decision. The comments are written by the advisory committee. Sometimes I joke, James Brown used to refer to himself often as the hardest working man in show business.
Yes, he did.
Right.
Sure.
The advisory committee, I think, is the hardest working committee in Hingham show business. So behind the scenes, they work throughout the year scrubbing budget requests, meeting with the school committee, every group that is going to put something on the warrant. Anyone who's going to ask Hingham to decide a matter, pose a question. Will the town prohibit marijuana shops? Will the town change its zoning bylaw to permit accessory dwelling units? Well, you wouldn't want to get that question cold at the meeting. So, gee, I don't know. It's complicated. So for months, sometimes, for example, on the accessory dwelling units, for years, the issue percolates. It's thought through. It's the subject of hearings. It's the subject of the planning board looking at what other communities are doing. Is it working? Is it not working? And ultimately, the question is put before the meeting, the legislature. And that legislature, particularly where it's a legislative body that assembles on a Monday in April, those folks, the typical voter, is not spending the entire year thinking about an issue. Some are, but many are not. So you get your question, you get your comment, and then you get a proposed answer. It's not multiple choice. The advisory committee, for example, typically will make a positive recommendation. It's called a motion. It moves. It's action. So sometimes people would say, I'd like to pass Article 26. So you can't pass the article. The article is the question. Never answer a question with a question, right? So you have a question, you have a comment, and you have a proposed answer. The role of the moderator is to try to keep some sense of order, to know the rules, to apply them fairly.
Moderators have been referred to as the traffic cops of democracy. You've used the
I didn't even get a whistle.
reference of, yeah, you're right. And you were quite skillful in your opening remarks at town meeting, sort of setting the tone and the tenor of how this meeting would be conducted. I would suppose that if it's going to get out of control, if it's going to get very contentious as a moderator, you probably have a sense for who might be the individuals that might come up to the mic and maybe try to control and drive the agenda. How do you prepare for these types of town meetings going forward when you know, for example, that there might be a warrant or two that's highly controversial?
We have been fortunate over many years to have an expectation, really, of how you will conduct yourself at the meeting. And as with many institutions, and it can be as nuclear as a family, where you might say to your child, we don't talk that way. Don't slam the door. Be more polite. Sit up straight. Whatever it is. So, now, fortunately, you don't have to do it at the meeting, but there's an expectation of how people conduct themselves when they are doing the business of the meeting. So on the positive side, in my experience in Hingham, both while Tom was the moderator and in the years since Tom stepped down and I became moderator, the kind of conduct that you have, understandably described that one might anticipate rarely happens, which is a blessing. And my late mother used to say, never forget, Michael, that the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I think Hingham has worked hard to create a certain climate at the meeting where you never refer to another citizen by name. If one were to do that, and to your specific question, suppose there's an issue in which you know it's charged. There's been a lot of discussion, going back to the fact that this doesn't just pop up. It's been socialized for months, subject of hearings. You might know, someone might give me a heads up that, boy, there were 2 very contentious hearings on this. And so, again, I like to anticipate that which can be anticipated. No foot faults, say, don't fumble. Don't fumble, just hold the ball. Why'd you fumble? Here, I try ahead of time. For example, on the Sunday before town meeting, we have what's effectively a tech rehearsal. Make sure we have everything. Make sure we've got the books. Make sure we've got the gavel. Make sure that the AV is all set up. And I also make a list of people whom we know wish to speak. I'll say official speakers. Might be the Lucy Hancock, who's currently the advisory committee chair. Before Article 6, which is the budget, traditionally the chair of the advisory committee makes an introductory comment, talks about the budget, the balanced budget, the process that she's gone through, that the committee has gone through. Now, it's not as though you need to be on the velvet rope list to get in, but it gives some sense of, okay, Mr. Healy from the Board of Selectmen wishes to speak on something. So I mark that down. So in part, I just don't forget that he would like to speak. But then you scan the room and you watch, and someone puts their hand up and you say, if I know them by name, I'll say, yes, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Brown. They come forward and speak into the microphone. If they start, I'll say, can you please identify who you are and your address? Which just helps people. It's the person, do I know that? Oh, that's who that is. It also, to me, shows respect for the meeting. That you're getting up as a voter, you're identifying who you are, where you live, and you are addressing the moderator. You're addressing the meeting. And if you have a question, you pose it to the chair. And there are times when it goes off the rails, even in polite, well-mannered Hingham. And you have to say, excuse me, you may not refer to that person by name. Now, typically the person recognizes that they've crossed the line and backs right off. If the person, for example, persists, then you might warn them a second time, or as has sometimes been the case, you would say, your time has expired. Because as you know, when a voter speaks to a subject the first time, he or she gets 6 minutes. And that, keep a stopwatch, a gift given to me by my predecessor, and it shows on that stopwatch 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 9 minutes, 12 minutes. So I know when that 5th minute, when you go from minute 5 and you begin minute 6, I say, you have 1 minute. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And if the person is clearly finishing and needs another 10 or 15 seconds, I'll let them finish. If they're saying, now, I'd like to turn to my next argument, and you say, your time has expired. Now, in all the years that I've lived in Hingham and been part of town meeting, I have never seen someone try to hold on to the microphone when the moderator has told the voter to cease.
Could we go a little bit deeper about what you see as the trend going forward with town meeting? Is it becoming more complex?
No question about that.
Are there more competing interests from the different subgroups that make up our community, for example, i.e. whether we have the growing population of seniors, empty nesters versus young new families? What are you seeing in terms of the growing pains, if you will, for our community?
Hingham obviously has grown in terms of population significantly. It's leveled off to some extent because there are natural constraints on the number of people. Hingham has a transient population to some extent, people who are being transferred into the area or moving out of the city, starting families, want to be in a good town with a good school system. And that's been ever thus. I mean, my oldest daughter did her master's thesis on the suburbanization of Hingham after World War II. So you could see that after something as significant as World War II and the GIs coming home, the fact that many people had seen Hingham working at the shipyard and the like, Hingham population grew dramatically. The other thing that I think has changed and to some extent poses a challenge to the concept of the meeting, but being an optimist at heart, I think it actually is less of a challenge than an opportunity, because I think the more people learn about the concept of town meeting, the more intrigued they are by it. And particularly in a society where you don't have control beyond perhaps, do I vote for candidate A or B? You don't have control, direct participation, that we can do that. You need to have a judge. You need to have the prosecuting, say it's a criminal trial, you need to have the prosecuting attorney, the defense counsel, but you need a jury. And the jury are regular people.
Michael, one of the biggest confusions, if you will, around town meeting procedurally is this notion called reconsideration. Oh yes. That's like a third rail. What exactly is it to the newcomer, and why is that so important?
Well, I suppose in simpler terms, you could call it a do-over, right? It's a do-over. So when a motion has been adopted, it's be like going to the replay booth, right? If you suppose you're one of the voters, and a matter has been decided, and you move for reconsideration. I mean, the meeting has made a decision. I might say, all those in favor, please say aye, aye. All those opposed, no, no. And clearly the ayes have it, so it's not necessarily my decision on the calling of the vote that's being questioned. It's actually a motion for reconsideration, as its name indicates, is asking the meeting that has just decided something, can we think about that again? Can we please reconsider that? So that requires for adoption. For example, it says right here, when I always read it, no vote may be reconsidered except after a 2/3 vote on a motion to reconsider such vote. A vote may not be reconsidered a second time or after a motion to reconsider it has failed to pass. So motions for reconsideration tend to come up in two different and quite distinct ways. One is what I'll call the more common sense interpretation of what a motion to reconsider would be, where you say, I'd like you to think about that again. Could you please, because you want a different decision, like going to the replay booth, right? Mm-hmm. So a motion for reconsideration needs a 2/3 majority. Let's assume it gets it. Assume that 2/3 of the people vote to reconsider what they have just done. Then you'd have a do-over. You'd vote it again. Maybe the vote would come out the same way again. Be odd since 2/3 of the people just wanted to reconsider it. But it might be reversed. So basically you're asking that the decision be reconsidered for possible reversal. There's another way a motion for reconsideration is used that is not necessarily what one would just commonsensically expect. And it's, when I read the motion for reconsideration where it says, a motion may not be reconsidered a second time or after a motion to reconsider has failed to pass. So suppose you are in the majority and you favor the original decision, right? So the meeting votes say, suppose you're a proponent of the bathhouse, and you really want to see that built. And there is a resounding yes, which you are delighted to have. You then say, motion to reconsider. And people think, gee, why is he asking to reconsider? Joe just got what he wanted. Because you want the motion for reconsideration to fail. Because it can't be reconsidered after it fails. So now you have nailed it.
Yes. So let's hold that thought for a second,
I
because
don't know if I can.
procedurally, I've seen in some town meeting where a group that's passionate votes and it passes, and then they all go home. All right, we're out of here. This is what we came for, and we got our vote in, and we got what we wanted, and now we leave. And then no
As
sooner
you can
do
tell
they
they're rookies.
leave, yes, no sooner do they leave, the opposing group stands and motions for reconsideration. And, oh, by the way, now that the majority group went home in favor of, you now have a different calculus in terms of 2/3 vote.
I think in part, people know the rules. And they know that if you had that victory that you just described and left with the matter still potentially open to reconsideration, you've left yourself vulnerable. And I know that you were not able to stay until 11:17 Monday night when we concluded the 2018 meeting. But there was a matter that came up quite late in the warrant, and it passed, and there was a material move toward the exits. And I found myself watching many voters leave, and the hour was late, so I couldn't, criticize folks for that. But I thought, and I said, obviously in good humor, I said, well, as you leave, do remain mindful of the expert parliamentarian on town meeting, Yogi Berra, who said, it ain't over till it's over. And one person said to me afterward, I knew what you were doing. You were reminding people that this is still subject to a motion for reconsideration. Yes. I said, well, actually, I wasn't that focused. I was just focused on the fact that the meeting is not over, and things can still happen. And if you choose to leave, realize that, as they say, every yes is many no's, that if you say yes to leaving, you are saying no to staying. And if you're saying no to staying, that means you're saying no to continuing to participate in the decision-making body that is the meeting. And you're leaving it in the hands of the people who remain.
Thank you again. And this concludes our episode featuring our guest, Michael J. Puzo, who is the Hingham Town Moderator. I'm your host, Joe Collymore. Tune in again. And oh, by the way, this button that I'm wearing, this is a fundraising button for the Hingham July 4 parade. So make sure you get your button. Michael, thank you again for being our guest today.
Oh, my pleasure, Joe. It was an honor to be with you. Thanks so much.
Lots of good fun.